The prime thing is you have to win.
Mina Kimes. There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
All right, welcome back to the Just Win podcast. I'm your host, Ted Wynn. That's my co-host, Marshall Newhouse. And today we're going to have Mina Kimes come on and talk about Klint Kubiak. We know Mina, she's an NFL expert, but she has a little slight leaning interest in Seattle, and that's her area of expertise. So I'll be interested to get her thoughts on Klint Kubiak and what he brings to the table as a coach. But before we do that, let's talk about some recent news. Ever since Kubiak's become officially the head coach of the Raiders, he has not made a hire defensive coordinator yet. He brought in Mike McCoy. What do you think about Mike McCoy as assistant head coach?
Listen, I love that. I think with a lot of these young coaches, having a guy who A, has been a head coach himself, but B, who has a history with you, I think is just an incredibly wise thing to do. Mike McCoy has worked with Klint Kubiak and knows him. And for all the people that maybe don't appreciate Klint Kubiak's leadership style or don't think it translates, well, this is a way to kind of offset that no matter how you feel. This is a guy who can be like, avoid that road, avoid this road, be yourself, and completely bolster him as he's trying to instill trust in a new organization, a new set of players, guys like Max Crosby, younger players. So I think of someone who knows you well, knows your heart, knows that, you're all ball, but can kind of point you in the right direction to cut the learning curve of what it means to be a head coach. Because this is his first time. This is Klint's first time. And so even as a son of Gary Kubiak, there's going to be, some stumbling blocks. And so if you have a guy there who can help smooth that out a little bit and let you find yourself, I think it's setting himself up to be that much more of a success. So I like the hire a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure there's got to be some crossover with Mike McCoy and Gary Kubiak. I wonder. I'll have to look that up later, but he's been in the league so long that there might be some crossover there. But like you said, it's just having a veteran presence with you. Being a head coach is an entirely different job requirement than being an offensive coordinator.
Klint has said he's going to keep calling plays. So having a coach there who can kind of be your assistant head coach at times, help you with the game management part, knowing your plate is going to be full, calling plays on game day on top of all the other things that a head coach has to do.
Yeah. And I liked what I heard from Klint in an interview. He talked about how when he spent time with Kyle Shanahan, he really took note of how Kyle spent his time as far as he was the offensive coordinator. So he had to spend time, as that offensive coach, installing the game plan, doing all those things. But he also had to spend time with the other parts of the team as well. So I just thought that was a cool little nugget and something that was very introspective of him to be able to note that while he was coaching, because obviously all these guys want to be head coaches eventually, but just to learn from Kyle, who to me is one of the most high level coaches in the league, was a good sign for Klint, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, he's got to get all the help he can get. We'll see, I'm sure he's, back channeling toward the guys he trusts in Seattle, both on offense and defense, to kind of bring them over for the Raiders. And then, seeing what the Raiders have and guys that they have either retained the rights to or not told to return. I think Rob Leonard on defense might be one of those guys, but coordinators that worked under Mike McDonald in Seattle are also kind of on that list. So, as a head coach, you are also a recruiter, and you're a recruiter of men as coaches, but men as players. And so we'll see, do these other guys believe in the Klint Kubiak vision for the Raiders specifically, and can he bring them over? It's not the end of the world, but it'd be nice to have people who are accustomed to you and understand kind of what you're about. Like, again, these are building blocks to creating not just a short-term success, but something that the Raiders need, which is a long-term sustainable foundation.
Yeah, hiring coaches is one of the most important skills of a head coach. I think Jesse Minter has put together a great staff so far in Baltimore. And unfortunately, when you win a Super Bowl or you're in the Super Bowl, You get a little bit of a late start to the process, and that pool kind of dries up a little bit. But I still think he could put together a strong staff. We talked about John Benton being one of the most important hires he could make. Um, and if if he offers him that offensive coordinator role, maybe it makes it a little bit more attractive for him to leave Seattle. But Benton, like Clint, is a guy that's moved around a lot. So maybe, he doesn't want to move and maybe he wants to stay in Seattle. So we'll see. But getting an offensive line coach obviously is extremely important. The Raiders also interviewed Frisman Jackson or Friesman Jackson. I got to learn how to pronounce his name. But he was a Seattle's receivers coach for him, and to me, that guy did an outstanding job too. I mean, when you look at all the how well these guys ran their routes, how detailed they were in their spacing and with their concepts, I thought he did a fantastic job. So it makes sense for him to interview Coach Jackson. I don't pronounce his first name.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any coach that is, not important. I mean, I'm seeing the clip going around of Cooper Kupp talking about that play action touchdown pass to AJ Barner that was almost kind of a disaster, and I like to imagine the coach having some influence on that room and guys having the autonomy and the awareness and the preparation to fix things on the fly and make a coach right, and that comes from just the day-to-day people who are with them, and that's from receivers to running backs to every position. And then, John Benton, I think, has a certain way with players from what I've heard. I didn't get the pleasure to play for him, but a certain way with players that is so informative. And then meeting a player where he is, where his body style is, and then also within this scheme. Because I just really think this scheme allows, with the proper buy-in, allows for a little bit more room for error and for guys to be just athletes, be more natural ball players, and then make up for one each other's weaknesses on the zone runs and hopefully in pass protection. So he's a really important hire. His assistant Otten might be an alternative if he decides he wants to stay put, like you said, having moved around a lot. But there is a lot of rapport, a lot of history there with the Kubiak family. And so you hope that Clint can kind of put his sales hat on and bring him to Las Vegas.
Yeah, and one more interview news we had from today was Rob Leonard, the longtime Raiders defensive line coach, also got an interview as defensive coordinator. So, obviously, to me, that's a hire that will help maybe bring Max Crosby back into the fold a little bit more. But he's a guy that the Raiders have blocked him from getting defensive coordinator interviews in the past. So he's a legitimate candidate in my opinion. He's learned under Patrick Graham for a long time. Guy that obviously has some respect around the league with different teams requesting to interview him. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's just the team trying to get a guy that Max Crosby trusts into the fold, or how serious do you see his candidacy?
Listen, there's not it's not a 0% chance of appeasement there. But I can't imagine that they're putting a ton of weight into even as important as he is, one player's potential opinion on a coaching hire. I think Rob Leonard has earned this opportunity. And if people don't know, if you're a head coach, you're allowed to deny your coordinators and position coaches lateral interviews. So lateral meaning if it's not another head coaching interview, you're allowed to deny them. I was in Green Bay, and so many members of Mike McCarthy's staff, he denied just because he wanted to keep continuity. It wasn't like, I don't believe, maybe there's guys who do it more than others. It wasn't trying to stifle a guy's career. It was trying to keep continuity in a building. And so Rob Leonard's still under the roof there in Las Vegas, and having been under Patrick Graham, you would like to think would improve upon that kind of style that I think Max very much likes to play in. So yes, it's a small part. It is not the whole part. There was Jim Schwartz was in the running, and again, you talked about it. Klint Kubiak being just literally the latest hire, just is at a disadvantage from a hiring standpoint. So I think maybe being more creative and hiring guys from within who is younger and allows a little bit more stability in this transition might be a prudent move.
Yeah. I might not have that right. I thought I saw them block some sort of interview from Rob Leonard before, but I do know other teams had interest in him either as a defensive line coach or defensive coordinator for their teams before. But you're right. Like you only could deny lateral moves. You can't deny interviews for potential promotions. So,
Yes.
but yeah, he is a guy that's respected around the league. It'll be interesting to see who else they interview throughout the process. Obviously, those Seattle guys are going to get interest from other teams, or they would have interest from other teams. It's just that these other teams already filled out their staffs because Seattle was in the playoffs for so long and in the Super Bowl. So it's not like they're left with nothing, but that the pool has dried a little bit, but you still get to pull from that McDonald tree if those coaches are interested in going.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll see how it all shakes out. I think the opening presser went well for Klint Kubiak. Again, he is himself. People were expecting, this demonstrative guy. I just don't see that's him. I still think he elicits a lot of respect out of players. You saw the OGs, the Hall of Famers, the all-time Raiders there at that press conference. I can't recall that those guys, Marcus Allen's, the Longs, Howie Longs, showing up in this kind of, call it solidarity, if you will, or coordination. Charles Woodson's there. I think they are on board. As much as that might matter to you, I think this Raiders organization is unique in that there is a storied history and a sense of fraternity among the players and coaches. And so for those guys to show up for him, I'm sure a lot of them played against his dad, have played against him and other members of his family. So there's a mutual respect there. But that shows me a level of buy-in to have a guy like Rich Gannon show up, Charles Woodson, Howie Long. So I think that bodes well for the start of this regime.
One thing I thought of that was interesting was one of the first things Mike McDonald did when he got hired by the Seahawks was he took down the pictures of the Legion of Boom because he wanted this Seattle team to build their own legacy. And the Raiders have always been so entrenched in their own history and so proud of holding on to the old legacy, and they should be to a certain point. But what do you think would happen, or what do you think about the notion that what if Kubiak has a similar idea about building a new culture with the Raiders and wanting to kind of separate this team from kind of the past legacy of the Raiders?
I think it's doable just because, to me, if we're kind of doing apples to apples, the Raiders don't have a unit or a successful portion of the team as recent as the Legion of Boom. So I think if they did have one, I would be open to that idea of, hey, we've got to create our own identity. But to me, the history of the Raiders is more of individual, not that they were, not team players, but an individual greatness. And so I think you absolutely lean into that. That's to me a little bit different than a more recent group because, it's a comparison thing. Are guys walking in the building always trying to compare themselves to the Richard Sherman led group? And that to me would be a detriment for younger players instead of kind of doing their own thing. But the Raiders don't have a whole lot of that in the last 30 years to really point to and speak of. So to me, it's an absolute positive to have the greats supported and around and infused into this program because all those guys I named are, I think, pretty unassailably positive, successful football players, but I think pillars of like character. And so that's something that I think they want to pull on, in my opinion. So it's a little bit different than the taking the Legion of Boom off the wall in a more recent manner.
Yeah, no, great point. And one more interesting thing I thought from his press conference was he said Mike McDonald really challenged that offensive staff, and after every game, he wouldn't want to look Mike McDonald in the eye and answer to him sometimes because he would grill him about what went right, what went wrong. And sometimes you don't see that from a defensive coach, or sometimes you don't see that from an offensive coach. They'll leave the other side of the ball kind of untouched. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think that makes him a better coach. I mean, like, what better training or criticism could you get from your offense from one of the best defensive play callers in the league. The guy just won the Super Bowl because of that defense.
Yeah, to me, that just symbols a level of high accountability. But you have to me, I think this goes kind of in life too. I don't have kids yet, but I have nephews and I have a lot of friends with kids, and just like raising young men and women, um, a high level of accountability, but also a high level of like encouragement. So if you, I assume Michael McDonald, held his feet to the fire, like, hey, tell me why this didn't go the way it should have gone. But also, you can see that the offense and the defense players like to play for him. And so it's both of those have to go hand in hand. It can't be putting your boot on people and never showing them how much you care and how much you believe in them. So I think Klint Kubiak, in my opinion, sees that as kind of an example. He's still going to be himself, but maybe he implements his own version of that, but flip it for an offensive coach asking, hey, the defense, how, we're going through the games, how could this have been done better, and holding them to a high level of accountability, because that trickles down. I've been on staffs where it felt more laissez-faire, and you just started to see cracks on game day of lack of accountability and discipline errors and pre-snap penalties and all that stuff. And it happens in a hurry if you kind of give too much of a window and too much oxygen for some of the bad stuff to breed. And so I like that idea of Mike McDonald doing that, and I hope Kubiak can kind of make his own version of that for the Raiders.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think because if you're a head coach and and you're an offensive coach and things start happening on a defense that you don't like, and you start criticizing the defense or saying something to the defensive coordinator, but at the same time, if you weren't there in the building process of things, and you weren't there trying to put your input while the game plan is getting put in, it's just like kind of an insult for you to just jump out of nowhere and to start trying to put your input in when the bullets are flying.
100%. I agree with that totally.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been an action-packed episode, and we'll get to Mina's interview. All right. I want to welcome our guest, Mina Kimes, expert on all things NFL, with a slight more interest in one team, the Seattle Seahawks, the Super Bowl champs. Mina, how do you feel? Your team won it all.
Yeah, I feel like the off season is starting to set in for me. It's crazy how like we have so much build up. We're talking about one game and then it's just over and that's it. You just don't talk about it anymore. But I got to spend Monday at Disneyland. We had the MVP and Sam Darnold come through, which was a ton of fun, and it was a really cool season. It was a really interesting season, I think. It was like I felt wide open for much of the year, and I think it's one we'll remember for defense. So I thought it was appropriate that the Seahawks defense dominated at the end. And I know people didn't like the game, but I think there was a lot to take from it.
Yeah, I think if you like defense and you were into the scheme and all that, and you're super nerdy, then you enjoyed the game. But I mean, I was there live. I thought it was pretty entertaining, but afterwards, I learned that a lot of people did not find it entertaining. But I mean, I guess the good part is winning, and then now the hard part of being a Super Bowl team is you start losing your coaches and all those things. And Klint Kubiak just got hired by the Raiders, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on to kind of talk about Klint Kubiak and what you saw from him this season. So compared to how Seattle players were used last season by Ryan Grubb, to me, I think one of Kubiak's strength is being able to slot players into positions where they could really use their strengths. Like, what stood out to you about the difference between how players were used last year and how Kubiak kind of utilized them this year?
Pretty dramatic transformation in the offense, right? You go from a Ryan Grubb offense that was very spread things out, quarterback in the gun, very pass heavy, to one that even when they didn't run the ball well, frankly, in the beginning of this year, believed and emphasized under center, outside zone run game, and a run heavy approach to get defenses to play base. So putting multiple tight ends on the field as well, putting two backs on the field, using a fullback, and then getting explosives off of play action off of that. And I think probably the way I would characterize it, and I think this is a big deal for the Raiders, especially with a young quarterback coming in, is it's much easier on the quarterback.
Yeah.
And I think there's reasons why they picked Sam, and I think why he was a good fit for that. And it all kind of came together, but I think that was the number one takeaway I had from the season. But also, I think over the course of the season, they did get better at running the football. They ran in different ways. I know I talked about outside zone, but they tried different things with different looks as well, different approaches. I thought he was really good at finding ways to use JSN or to even get opportunities for JSN and other players to benefit from the presence of JSN. But I think the thing that probably is the most important was how much he supported Sam Darnold and also supported the offensive line. Not only was Geno Smith in a terrible position often in 2024, so was the Seahawks offensive line. And Marshall, we talked about this actually when Kubiak was a play caller in New Orleans. His system is just much easier for an offensive line. And personnel changed a little bit. They drafted a guard first round, and the right tackle actually played a healthy season. But I do think his system helped a Seahawks offensive line that, I don't know if folks remember, but for like 10 years was bad before this. So I think he did a lot of things really well.
It's funny. I don't know if I mentioned to Ted, but in another conversation this season, I mentioned to people the name J.R. Sweezy because they have forgotten just how patchwork this Seattle offensive line has been in the past. But anyways, to me, I love witnessing kind of the league-wide trend pendulum swing back and forth. So we've gone to, the McVay-Shanahan tree, 12, 13 personnel, play action pass and first down. A lot of, and then the defense is now matching with nickel and this Mike McDonald not having his own tree and way of doing things. How do you see the kind of counterpunch to the offensive play calling? And now, McDonald having, these Ted calls it a premium nickel package where he wants to play too high, rush the passer with 4, make you earn the run and test your tight ends to block. Where do you see kind of the next season where the pendulum is going?
Well, the thing about Seahawks, it's so funny because I felt this way for so long about the San Francisco 49ers. The best type of defense, not the Seahawks offense, is the Seahawks defense, right? A defense you're able to stop the run without putting extra linebackers on the field, and you don't have to. You can stay in those too high shells. Not always. I think the Rams game as a championship, but both Rams games at the end were good examples of an offense whose run game was so good it actually forced Seattle to bring a safety down, and then Matthew Stafford was able to hit play action and get one-on-ones off of that. But in general, I think the build of the Seahawks defense is where the league is going to try to go. We're going to see more ultra-athletic, kind of big nickel types who can tackle really well. And I think tackling has never been more valuable for slot as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of other things the Seahawks defense does really well, but I think those sorts of body types are something we're going to see more and more of.
Yeah, I think ideally, if you run that system well, the importance of the outside corner becomes a little bit less because, you could play more too high. You could be more varied in your coverages. So you're not asking those outside corners to play a ton of one-on-one coverage. I think when people ask me like what's the weakness in Seattle's defense, it's not really a weakness, but their outside corners aren't as elite as the other players in that system. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's funny, right? It's such a contrast to the Pete defenses. But yeah, I think you're right. I also think though, I talked about like the tackling ability of the defensive backs. I would also do another very important part of the defense is the run defense of the edges. And it's another thing where like, you go out to get Nick Worry, he's like a skeleton key, but a player like DeMarcus Lawrence, like who, people talk about all the ways in which the Seahawks surprised this season. That might have been most surprising of all. It's just not, obviously he was an incredibly dominant player at points during the season, but he's obviously getting up in the years. I didn't think he would be that important and that good in Seattle. But I think when you look at how the Seahawks defensive line is built, they really seem to prioritize and emphasize complete edges in their defense. And I think that's something, if you're going to play out of those structures, that's really, really, really significant. So it's another thing, which is kind of like the other side of the coin of like having it's like, oh, okay, maybe actually we we need to prioritize run defense at positions where maybe it hasn't been valued as much as it has in the past.
Yeah,
which
or
is
like,
why
find guys who can do a little bit of everything and that not being a knock.
Mhm.
We need people that are like exceptional pass rushers or exceptional run blockers. But yeah, I played against DeMarcus Lawrence. I wouldn't say that he was an exceptional run blocker, but you wanted to not be in third and long because he could really make you pay with pressure. But I'm watching the Super Bowl and he is, a tight six on the tackle or on the tight end, and he's using both arms and stabbing Will Campbell in the chest over and over again, shedding the tight ends. I mean, he's playing a complete game, which, obviously there's some guys who can do that better than others, but I think it's a coaching thing. I think his game at his age took another step with what the Seattle defense needed specifically this season. So, finding guys who could fit that mold of like, hey, can you do a little bit of everything? And then when time calls, can you get pressure? That's obviously a luxury, but I mean, it means something to this defense.
Yeah, which is why it's going to be important if Kubiak's going to get a coach from that McDonald defense tree that they have to keep Max Crosby. But that's a whole nother different conversation. But
Again,
where
so
do you
much
stand on
better.
this whole thing about Kubiak being too quiet? Like, do you think he was too quiet, or do you think a coach can be quiet and still be a quote unquote leader of men?
Yeah, I think the personality and leadership aspect of the head coach is the hardest thing to project. Like, we can, from the outside, watch scheme and we can pick whether or not we think coaches will succeed based on that. But in terms of like running the room, commanding respect, running the operation overall, right? Game management, listening to people, all of those things, it's impossible to know until they get the jobs. McDonald's not like a huge talker. I think Kubiak reputationally is even quieter than him from what I've heard, but I always withhold judgment on that side of things until we see how it all plays out. I think it's probably, I'll throw this out there, probably a better fit for a young quarterback than a veteran one who's like a huge presence maybe. So that might work out in his favor. I'm very curious to see what kind of staff he puts together too, especially if you're not like a big personality. I know there's some names from Seattle being floated around, and we'll see how much he's able to raid the Seahawks for his team and what he puts together. But I think it's always an unknown until we see how, or we hear, frankly, what it's like inside the locker room.
Yeah. I had a question about the rest of this division. So, the Raiders are a project. We don't know what the timeline will be. We don't know how successful it'll be. The first overall pick helps and cap space helps. But listen, you've got the Chiefs, Broncos, and Chargers all there with we assume with Bo Nix, their franchise guys and their long-term guys. But who's in this division ready to snap back and like make another run? Because it felt like, the Raiders were falling so far behind because these teams are kind of leaving them in the dust. But just with, I think Kansas City is kind of in a dire position, more so than people realize, even with Pat. I think Pat coming back to have a good season. But I'm wondering kind of how you feel about the rest of this division and the Raiders' place in it.
I really like the Mike McDaniel hire in Los Angeles, and I'm pretty optimistic about what that could mean for the offense. Also, knock on wood, not playing with an entirely injured offensive line could help.
Yeah.
I think, however, the loss of Jesse Minter, I'm interested in seeing how that affects them on defense. But I generally, even though that was a team that obviously made the playoffs, I think that things are going to go in the right direction this year on offense. So I'm high on them. I share your questions about Kansas City. Like, there's a lot of issues with that roster. The drafts haven't really borne as much fruit as you would like. And I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. They also have a lot of needs at really high value positions like wide receiver, edge, corner. So that would make me a little bit nervous, but it's also like they did lose a lot of close games and they have Patrick Mahomes. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being better. I think with Las Vegas, it's going to be a multi-year process. Maybe I'm wrong, but defensively, there's just still so many needs on that side of the ball. And while I do like the Kubiak hire and I'm very optimistic about what it means for the young quarterback, there's still, I think they have pretty significant personnel needs as well on offense. The offensive line, I asked Ted about this, like, who are you on the existing offensive line? who do you feel good about for his system? And, you mentioned a few players, but I think it's still like that's to me something they're going to have to continue building on, in addition to, of course, finding a wide receiver one at some point.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think this year you really focus on building up that offense and building around Fernando Mendoza, so you get a proper evaluation on him and a good year of development instead of leaving him out to dry. And the defense, I think it's not like you don't worry about the defense, but to me, the focus and resources should be getting poured into the offense, in my opinion. But and also just going back to the AFC West, I think the Broncos have some interest. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Broncos too. And there's kind of a weird power struggle with the play calling thing. Supposedly he's going to get handed off to Davis Webb, but I just don't see.
Really?
I don't see
Is
Sean
that
Payton
the
doing
way
that.
of keeping him?
Yeah. But yeah, just going back to Kubiak, coaches from the Shanahan tree often get accused of being script merchants. Like they have a good first 15 plays and they kind of struggle from there. What do you think about Kubiak's ability to adjust, and what have you
Oh,
seen
yeah.
from him?
I think it's fantastic. That might be the most impressive thing. I mean, I think it was the second Rams game where JSN got blanked in the first half because they were, devoting extra resources to covering him, and just watching him find ways to get him involved in the second half. And you saw that, whether it was putting him in the backfield, putting him in motion. Some games towards the end of the season, we started putting him back in the slot more because of the way defenses were playing him. But you would see that play out in games as well. In ways that I thought was genuinely impressive. The run game as well, this was a bad run game for the first half of the season, but found ways as the year went along to create opportunities for Kenneth Walker, and I think catered to his skill set, even in the Super Bowl, right? Like, I think starting with a lot of those stretch runs, challenging the edges, and then you watch New England put more bodies on line of scrimmage, and then he started hitting them with some gap runs, and Kenneth popped a few of those off. That was stuff you saw all year long with him that I think really speaks to his ability to, like you said, make adjustments in game. And so, as well as over the course of the season. So really impressive, honestly. I feel like a lot of those skills will be really, really helpful with a young quarterback next year. And I just started watching Mendoza. So I don't have like super strong opinions, but I do see a lot of the qualities that I think made this Seattle offense go. I think that'll pair well with it.
So Mina, you've been taking lashes like it's unbelievable the revisionist history that people have about your take with Geno Smith. I agreed with you in the moment about. I thought he would raise the floor of this team. They wouldn't be a contender. They were not ready for that, but I thought he would raise the floor coming off a really good season in Seattle. How do you feel about him staying under contract with the Raiders and being kind of a transitionary quarterback? Because there's a lot of fans. I didn't realize it was this stark, and I get they're a little embattered a little bit, but they just want him gone.
I don't think I'm very popular with Raiders fans, to be honest.
I took those last
because
don't worry.
I thought it was a good trade for them. I really did. I think what I got wrong, and there's two things. I think Geno regressed. I do think so. I think you saw, just some inaccuracy that you just didn't see in Seattle, quite frankly. Now, why that is I think the question that will determine whether or not he can still play in the NFL. Is it because of the situation so bad in Vegas? And I think it was. I'll get to that part. Or is it a declining arm situation? Because if it's that, I think that's going to really affect the rest of his career, what he can do in Las Vegas, whatever. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. Financially, I think last I checked, it doesn't really benefit the Raiders to move on unless
not this season.
Yeah,
There would be no dead cap hit after the 2026 season.
So, you draft a young quarterback, you can hang on to the vet as the bridge, keep him, decide how you want to approach it. Fans will yell at you at some point. You can. But the other thing about Geno that I got wrong, aside from his own regression, and this was the more dramatic one, was the Raiders' offensive line was so much worse than I thought it would be. Some of that was injuries, right, with Miller and who's their best player and whatnot. But, I thought, okay, this is an improving group. JPJ is going to play center, and it was a disaster. I mean, it was just nightmarish. And people will hear that and be like, "You're making excuses for Geno," and I'm really not. Like, I don't think any quarterback would
Guys,
have had
Ted and I were
success
doing these shows, and I was like, I don't have a lot of hair. I was pulling it out because it
as an
wasn't that
offensive
they were
lineman.
bad. Is that the things that we're doing didn't make sense, and now we understand on the back end a potential reason why that didn't make sense in the offensive line. But I agree with you. Yeah,
It was a nightmare. It was also the worst run game in football. Talk about Geno being in a terrible situation. I mean, Genti was just in hell his first year.
Yeah.
I do question some of the ways he was used or not used, and that's something I'd be very excited for with Kubiak.
I don't want to stir the pot. Does Genti have it? I just have to say it. I have to ask.
I don't know. I'm sorry. How could you judge any running back in this offense last year? Am I wrong? Like, it was just disgusting.
Yeah, he was.
How many times did he get contacted behind the line of scrimmage?
It was like the top. It was top, bottom 3 in the league. He was getting hit as soon as he got the handoff every time.
101% of his yards came after contact last year.
I mean, look, like, there's a lot of things about, I think Chip Kelly, that was the third piece. I thought Chip Kelly would be better. And I think two of my lessons coming from being wrong about the Raiders, and I didn't have the Raiders as like a playoff team or anything, but I thought the offense would be fun. I legitimately was like, this will be interesting. Wrong. I think the Geno aspect, the offensive line aspect, but the Chip thing, I'll just straight up, I'm going to be very apprehensive moving forward of college play callers coming to the NFL. Frankly, Grubb, then Chip. So Geno had to go back to back because I thought Grubb was brilliant. It was Washington, but it's such different when you're coaching with the talent discrepancy like those guys had at their college stops and in good offensive lines. So Husky's offensive line was amazing, obviously guys. So I think that those are kind of some of the lessons of the 2025 Raiders season for me. It's like, okay, offensive line really matters. Speculation is not mean, improvement, and got to be wary of some of these college play callers coming in. And yeah, I think that's played a huge role in why it was so bad.
All right, Mina, last question. And just know before you answer this, I already threw myself in front of this train. What are the chances that Geno has a resurgent half a season if he starts before Mendoza takes over before the bye week in Kubiak's system?
I think it'll look better than it did last year, but resurgence probably a little bit strong. But I think the question that I posed about how much of it was just a horrible situation and Geno because Geno, this has always been, he will make a bad situation worse because he's so aggressive. So I think whether or not that his arm is declining is going to go a long ways towards determining whether or not it looks better. But resurgent feels a little strong. I'm pretty. I think I took an L on Geno in like week 5. I came back to haunt me like over and over throughout the course of the season. I also didn't even have like a Sam Darnold take, but whatever. But yeah, I'll be interested in seeing how they handle it. I'll also be interested though as we head into free agency and the draft and seeing what they do to address the personnel on that side, because with the young quarterback, it's not just about bringing in the play caller. They really need to create a better situation for Mendoza. Yeah. And there's a few pieces that are missing on this offense.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you have a meeting to go to. And congratulations again. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Appreciate you, Mina. All right.